A government-issued FBI vehicle sat still on a dusty red road, its headlights still on, the driver's door ajar, but no one inside. In 2007, Special Agent Sean Rivers and his partner Julia Hahn vanished without a trace in the southern Nevada desert during a nighttime operation. They were never seen again. Their vehicle was found 12 miles from the nearest field office. No distress signal, no surveillance footage, no witnesses. It marked the beginning of one of the FBI's most baffling disappearances in the history of the American West. Nearly 2 decades passed. The case went cold. But in the fall of 2025, a group of archaeology students stumbled upon a rotting log cabin deep in the parched desert basin. Its basement was sealed in concrete, and inside was something none of them would ever forget. A skeleton dressed in full FBI tactical gear, a weathered ID badge caked in dust, and a secret that had been buried for far too long. Sean Rivers wasn't the kind of man you easily forgot, even if he never sought the spotlight. At 36, he was a seasoned FBI agent with a long record of federal operations under his belt. But to those who knew him best, it wasn't the accolades that stood out, it was how he chose silence over self-praise, presence over promises. Sean was tall, dark-skinned, with steady eyes and a warm, low voice. He looked like someone who'd aged ahead of his time, maybe because of what he'd already lived through. His wife, Daria, had died from an aggressive cancer when their daughter Aaliyah was just 3. Since then, Sean had been everything: father, mother, agent. He turned down long assignments to always be there when Aaliyah needed him. Story time with her was scheduled on his calendar like a high-level briefing, non-negotiable. People called him the dad in body armor, and he never corrected them to Sean. That was the highest honor he'd ever worn. His last partner was Agent Julia Hahn, young Korean-American woman, 28, newly transferred from the Seattle office. Julia wasn't easy to get close to, but once she trusted you, she was all in. In a world as cold as federal investigations could be, Julia had somehow held on to both her instinct and her fire. She called Sean the quietest mentor I've ever had. While Sean would joke, she had enough energy for both of them. They were opposites, but in sync. Sean moved slow and steady, always asking the right questions at the right moment. Julia moved fast, unafraid, and had a way of making even the most closed-off witnesses open up. They were usually assigned the cases nobody else wanted: missing Indigenous women, cross-border trafficking rings, victims with no families to advocate for them. But those were the ones they gave everything to, because they knew what makes a person disappear isn't always a kidnapper, it's the silence of a system that looks away. Few at the office knew Sean was planning a transfer, not for a promotion, but to be closer to his mother, who'd just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He'd already written the request, but hadn't yet sent it. In a rare heart-to-heart with Julia, he said, "I don't want Aaliyah growing up thinking justice means loss. I'm tired of giving everything just to catch one more criminal." Maybe that's why, the night before he vanished, he had different plans: a quiet trip with Aaliyah to a lake near Arizona. For the first time in 6 years, he'd bought plane tickets not tied to a case, but when Julia called about an urgent tip involving an abandoned safe house once used in border smuggling, Sean changed course. He couldn't shake the habit of just checking it out real quick that night. At 8 p.m., he and Julia drove out from the field office. No one knew it would be the last time either of them was seen alive. October 12th, 2007, 8:52 p.m. That was the last time the FBI's GPS tracking system recorded a signal from the government-issued SUV driven by Special Agent Sean Rivers. The location, an isolated dirt road along the southern rim of Nye County, Nevada, an area with no stable phone signal, no traffic cameras, no residential structures. Locals once called it the map's blind spot, a stretch of no man's land between federal property and abandoned mining zones from the 1980s, inside the FBI's internal system. Sean had filed no official mission report. Julia hadn't logged a departure either. That alone was unusual. But when the SUV was found early the next morning, the mystery deepened. The headlights were still on. The driver's door was ajar, the front seat pushed back, as if someone had stood up in a hurry. On the passenger seat, a folded desert map, with a red circle around a location marked only as D77 bunkhouse. No known records matched that code. A faint smear of blood stained the floor at source, unknown. And most troubling, the communication unit had been stripped of its battery. Neither service weapon was in the vehicle. There were no signs of a struggle, no tire tracks from another vehicle, just a single trail of footprints leading west, then vanishing into the sand. Search teams were deployed within the first 12 hours, rapid response units, K-9 teams, aerial sweeps. It was one of the largest mobilizations ever seen in that part of Nevada, lasting nearly 10 straight days. But the desert doesn't give up its secrets easily. Blistering daylight erased clues. At night, the cold and wind-driven sand wiped the slate clean. Following the tracks became nearly impossible. Only one item was recovered: a strip of black parachute-grade nylon, resembling the kind used in tactical belt gear, found roughly 400 meters from the vehicle. No DNA, no drag marks, no supporting evidence. After 3 weeks, the FBI scaled down the investigation, reclassifying the case as a disappearance of unknown cause. Sean and Julia were listed as presumed dead killed in the line of duty, though no bodies were ever recovered. No further leads, no resolution. Over the years, media referred to the case as the Desert Mystery. There was no scandal, no sweeping press coverage, no one held accountable. The local bureau quietly reshuffled staff. The official report was written in neutral, vague language, enough to avoid lawsuits, but not enough to satisfy anyone. Julia was lumped into the unofficial list of fallen agents, her death unrecognized due to the absence of a body. Sean's name appeared in a single line within a thick federal file, missing in the line of duty. Only the families remembered. Sean's mother still kept his coffee mug on the kitchen counter, right where he used to place it every morning. Aaliyah, just 9 years old at the time, grew up in silence, carrying a question no one ever answered. Why didn't Dad come home? She wrote dozens of letters, to the FBI, to the president, even to the show America's Missing Heroes. None were ever answered. In a brief interview with a local radio station, now a freshman law student, Aaliyah said something that left the host speechless. If my dad really died for justice, then why has justice been silent for 18 years? In the fall of 2025, a group of archaeology students from the University of Nevada were on a field practicum in the borderlands between Nye and Lincoln County, an area once home to silver mining camps abandoned since the 1960s, while conducting a geological survey. They came across an odd slab of concrete behind a half-buried, rotting log cabin. One student slipped through a sinkhole in the sand, revealing a sealed basement, its entrance buried beneath layers of dust and concrete. Following protocol, the team alerted local authorities. Within 24 hours, a federal investigation team arrived to excavate the site. What they uncovered shocked everyone. Beneath the hardened floor was a sealed, windowless chamber, no doors, no exit, just claw-like scrapes along the cement walls and a handful of decomposed personal items. In the center of the room, a skeleton slumped against the wall, wrists still bound with military-grade rope. The body wore a faded FBI tactical uniform. The ID badge, still legible beneath layers of dust, read Julia Han. Initial forensics confirmed fractured ribs and a cracked skull, but no signs of a major struggle. The most puzzling detail: a black G-Shock tactical watch still strapped to the right wrist, etched into its metal backing, lone name, Sean Rivers. The discovery of that watch cracked open the silence that had buried the case for nearly 2 decades. Sean's family immediately confirmed it as his, the very one gifted to him by his daughter, Aaliyah, on his birthday. It had vanished with him that night in 2007. So how did it end up on Julia's remains? Was Sean the last person to see her alive in that underground room, or was he the one who left her there? Investigators also recovered a small wooden box in the corner of the chamber. Inside was a single yellowed slip of paper, handwriting shaky and slanted left. It read D77. The error is here. The penmanship bore similarities to Sean's. Based on archived samples from his personnel file, the message felt like a warning or a confession interrupted, and just like that. The code D77 last, seen circled on a paper map in the SUV back in 2007, came back into focus. The leak of this information within federal circles sent shockwaves across the agency. For the first time in 18 years, the case of Sean Rivers and Julia Hahn was reopened. But now, it wasn't just about how they disappeared. It was about who had truly stood on the side of justice. At 27, Aaliyah Rivers was a research assistant at UCLA Law School, completely unaware that a decades-old skeleton in the desert was about to upend her life. The call from the FBI came just hours after Julia's identity was confirmed. At first, she thought it was a mistake, but when she heard the words, "Your father," she couldn't sit still. She flew to Nevada immediately, carrying with her a thick folder she'd been building for the past 6 years, requests to reopen the case, lists of potential witnesses, satellite-based maps she had personally created of the disappearance zone. At her first meeting with the agent assigned to the case, Aaliyah didn't cry. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out a weathered leather-bound book, and laid it on the table. "I think there's something in here you need to see," she said. Tucked between the pages were handwritten entries, Sean's old notes. Formatted like mini case files, when Aaliyah was a child, he'd used them to help her understand what his job meant, but among the last pages, scribbled between blank margins, were words he'd hidden from everyone else. A warning from an internal source not to go near D77. No names, no details, just one chilling line. "If you keep going, she dies first." Aaliyah closed the book, looked the agent in the eye, and spoke without trembling. They didn't disappear. They were disappeared. And someone in this agency has known that from the beginning, as the FBI prepared to expand its excavation of the basement site. A name from the past emerged, unexpected, and long silent, Terrence Moore. Former Internal Information Coordinator at the Nevada Field Office from 2005 to 2010, reached out to the Federal Bureau in Carson City. Now retired and living near Lake Tahoe, Terrence had cut all ties with law enforcement for over a decade, but when he heard the disappearance of Sean Rivers and Julia Hahn was being re-examined, he knew it was time to break his silence. In a secured meeting cabin, Terrence described a series of internal reports marked classified from 2007, precisely the time Sean and Julia vanished. These records were never archived in the open database, but Terrence, then assigned to technical processing, vividly remembered one specific audio file Julia Hahn uploaded to the server just hours before she left the office. The recording didn't contain formal case notes, but Julia's voice sounded tense. She said, "I don't think Sean knows he's being set up." That line had been flagged as ambiguous and dismissed. Terrence had tried to file an internal alert, but his direct supervisor, then assistant director of operations, ordered him to delete the file immediately. No explanation. No written record. Months later, that same assistant director resigned quietly and took a consulting position with a private logistics corporation operating along the U.S. and Mexico border. The very company Sean had been quietly investigating before he vanished. Following Terrence's testimony, the new lead agent on the case, Selena Cruz, began combing through archived materials related to that logistics company, buried in hundreds of pages. She found a name that initially drew little attention, Leonard D. Riggins. On paper, Riggins was listed as a strategic operations consultant for RGO Logistics, a cross-border freight company. But when Selena ran his name through the federal personnel database, her heart stopped. Riggins had once served as chief of tactical coordination at the Nevada FBI field office, Sean and Julia's direct superior at the time of their disappearance. According to internal records, Riggins had taken medical leave in late 2007, just 3 months after the incident, and disappeared from all formal government affiliation. There was no investigation, no accountability review, no property audit. By 2008, he began appearing at business events alongside executives from major logistics conglomerates, including one group previously flagged for suspected links to human trafficking when his photo was printed. Aaliyah immediately recognized him. "He had dinner at our house once," she said. "He told my dad to drop D77, that it was too vague to pursue." While the forensics team continued work at the basement site, another unit investigated an old warehouse marked on the folded map found in the SUV back in 2007. The building had burned down in 2010, ruled a lightning accident at the time and largely forgotten. But beneath the scorched concrete, investigators discovered a small metal box. Inside, a partially burned, large-format map. Though its edges were singed, The center was still legible. 3 locations circled in red, ink D77, D77A, and N4 tunnel. That last name, N4 tunnel set, off alarms. It matched the designation of an abandoned Cold War-era transport tunnel near the Nevada test site, originally built for covert military logistics. It had long been thought defunct. But if someone wanted to move people or cargo off radar, this was where they'd do it. On the back of the map, scrawled in smeared ink, was a chilling confession. It wasn't Julia's fault. I brought her because I couldn't do it alone. The handwriting matched previous notes stilted left, emotionally unguarded. All signs pointed to Sean Rivers. But this time, the narrative shifted. Julia wasn't left behind. She was brought in. Sean hadn't betrayed her. He had uncovered something bigger, an internal protection network shielding a human trafficking operation. And with nowhere to turn, no one he could trust. He took Julia not as bait, but as a witness, as a partner. But something went wrong in that basement. When Aaliyah read those words, I brought her because I couldn't do it alone. She cried. Not from anger, but from recognition. That was who her father had always been. Never alone, never silent, never looking away. And maybe, because of that, he was betrayed. The case was no longer about who took them. It had become, who among us allowed it to happen among a growing list of suspects. One name stood at the top, Leonard Riggins, living in a private, heavily guarded estate in Utah, untouched by federal scrutiny. A federal summons was being prepared, but the agents knew if Riggins truly was involved, then he wasn't the whole story. He was just the tip of a deeper, darker iceberg. After consolidating all leads from the basement site, the burned map, and Terrence Moore's testimony, the investigative team widened its scope, tracing any personal property once belonging to Sean Rivers in a sealed evidence locker. Untouched since 2008, they found an old IDE format hard drive requiring special hardware to access. Most files were corrupted or blank, but one hidden folder remained intact. Its name, Cicada 77. Inside were scanned photographs, film-based, analog images from Sean's border operations between 2005 and 2007. Most were standard field images, desert terrain, vehicle tracks, logistical sites. But one photograph stopped everyone cold. It showed Julia Hahn sitting across from Leonard Riggins at a small roadside cafe. She leaned forward, face unreadable. Riggins had one hand resting on a closed document folder. No one else was in frame. The angle suggested it had been taken from a distance, possibly through a windshield. The metadata confirmed it. The photo was taken with Sean's own camera. But if Sean had suspected Riggins, why hadn't he shared this photo with anyone? If Julia had met with Riggins in private, what did she know that Sean didn't? Aaliyah, reviewing the files, spoke quietly. Either my dad trusted the wrong person, or he discovered something even worse. The case was no longer a simple arc of betrayal and loyalty. Sean as the victim, Julia the partner, Riggins the traitor. Now, a new possibility formed in lead agent Selena Cruz's mind. What if both Sean and Julia were being manipulated from the start? Selena reconstructed the timeline. Julia had been transferred to the Nevada office just 7 months before her disappearance. A short window but long enough to access archived files on D77, the same case Riggins had closed in 2006, citing lack of field evidence. Julia had submitted a proposal to reopen the investigation, specifically targeting unsanctioned transport activity near the N4 tunnel. Her proposal was denied. More troubling, Julia had taken a sudden 2-day leave just a week before she vanished. No medical reason, no case reports. Her calendar entry, visiting family. But Julia had no family in Nevada. She was an only child. Her parents lived in Washington. This detail, overlooked for years, began to reshape everything. Had Julia suspected Sean, or had she been planted to watch him? The possibility that Julia was a covert monitor sent shockwaves through the investigative team. But the hardest truth to accept was this: every piece of evidence supported multiple readings. If Julia had collaborated with Riggins, why had she died? Bound, with broken ribs in a cement tomb. If Sean had discovered her betrayal, why leave his personal watch with her body? The one object that could implicate him. Aaliyah refused to believe in betrayal. She was adamant her father could doubt anyone except the agent he trained himself. But even she had to admit she had never seen how his final hours ended, and no one could truly imagine what Julia endured in that sealed basement. A new theory began to emerge. Sean and Julia weren't lured there by accident. They were led there, together. Someone wanted them to vanish at the same time. A quiet rumor, long dismissed in older federal circles, resurfaced. That the N4 tunnel had once served as a staging ground for human cargo in post-9/11 covert operations. No paperwork, no oversight, absolute silence. If Sean had stumbled onto that, and Julia realized it too late, they may have both become threats to the very system they had sworn to serve. There's still no official conclusion, but everyone in the investigation now felt one truth. No one is entirely trustworthy. No document stands as absolute proof. And if the truth was erased from the beginning, then justice is no longer about who was right or who was wrong. It's about one simple question: who's still willing to look for it? Do I die LBND, ti nung anh phhpv, I fong ch documentary m, dng v eg nung k, cmxc, vnhp dubnucu. May 2026. After more than a year of renewed investigation, Julia Hahn was finally laid to rest at the National Cemetery for Federal Employees in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The ceremony was quiet, no media, no high-ranking officials, just a few former colleagues, Julia's mother from Washington, and Aaliyah Rivers, who stood silently through the entire service, dressed in simple black, holding a single sunflower. The headstone read, Julia Hahn, Federal Agent, missing in the line of duty. But just below, in smaller letters, a line Aaliyah had personally requested no one should have to die in silence. No one objected after everyone left. Aaliyah stayed behind. She placed a weathered leather-bound book at the foot of the grave, her father's old investigation journal. If you're still out there somewhere, she whispered, just know I'm still going. For Aaliyah, the truth about her father remained buried somewhere in the desert, or perhaps locked inside a hard drive no one ever decrypted. But she also understood justice doesn't always come with a verdict. Sometimes. The act of refusing to stop searching, even without answers, is what keeps a person from disappearing entirely. The case remains officially listed as open and ongoing. No arrests have been made. Leonard Riggins, after 3 long interview sessions, denied all involvement. He invoked his right to remain silent, kept his private lawyer close, and cited unverifiable affiliations with any criminal groups. The media stopped following the case. Too technical. No clear villain. A few independent papers ran brief stories, but they got buried beneath the latest political scandal. Aaliyah was once invited onto a national talk show. She declined. I'm not looking for sympathy, she said. I'm asking people to remember. Inside the FBI, the D-77 file was quietly moved, again this time labeled highly sensitive. No word on whether another independent probe would follow, but Agent Selena Cruz, lead investigator, kept a full copy of every document, every map. She couldn't promise she'd find the truth, but she made a different promise. No one gets to erase the trail. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, the N4 tunnel still sits in silence. No one's certain it was ever sealed. But one thing is clear. That place doesn't just bury bones. It buries questions that were never supposed to be answered. Like, why did 2 federal agents die in silence, and who benefited from that silence? Late 2026. Aaliyah self-published a small book. Not an expose, not a memoir. Just fragments, pages of scattered memories titled A Desert Without Maps. She wrote about childhood moments with her father, the quiet lessons he taught her about integrity, and the scars he brought home, without explanation, on the final page. Only one line: I don't know what my father did in his final hours, but I believe he didn't choose silence. And if one day, you too must choose between truth and safety, I hope you won't choose silence either. The book quietly circulated on social media, especially among law students, journalists, and human rights circles. It didn't change any laws, but it planted something stronger: healthy doubt, small resistance, a stubborn memory, at a TEDx talk at a local university. Aaliyah stood before 200 students and ended her speech with this: "If you ever thought someone disappeared because they did something wrong, think again. Sometimes it's the ones going the right way who scare people the most." So now the question is yours. What do you believe happened inside that house in the desert? Was Sean Rivers betrayed by someone he trusted, or were he and Julia Both pawns in a game they never had a chance to escape? If you believe Sean tried to do the right thing, even when no one else stood with him, comment, "I won't stay silent either."